Dawn breaks over the jungle. Today the sun rises with a vengeance, burning away the mist and painting the sky in glorious shades of gold. The golden hour has arrived. James and Diep have climbed to a high ridge, a hidden plateau surrounded by ancient banyan trees. It is a natural cathedral. The canopy above filters the sunlight into beams that illuminate the mossy floor. James drops his heavy pack. He looks around. He is an architect. He knows a perfect venue when he sees one. "Here," James whispers. "We do it here." Diep leans against a tree, clutching the waterproof bag. "Here, in the dirt." "It's not dirt," James smiles, kicking leaves aside to reveal soft green moss. "It's velvet. Look at the lighting. I couldn't design this if I had $1 million. He takes the bag from her hands. "Go behind that tree," he says gently. "Put on the dress. Give me 20 minutes. 20 minutes? Diep raises an eyebrow. "What are you going to do?" "Build a church," James winks. "Go." Diep disappears behind the massive trunk. James is alone. The survivor mode turns off. The visionary turns on. He moves with purpose. He doesn't have staff. He doesn't have florists. He has his hands and his creativity. He finds a large flat rock in the center of the clearing. This will be the altar. He brushes it clean and washes it with water from his canteen until the stone shines black like marble. He runs into the undergrowth. He gathers white wild orchids for purity and red hibiscus for passion. He arranges them on the altar with the symmetrical precision of a high-end design. He cuts vines and drapes them from the branches above, creating a curtain that frames the stage. He checks his reflection in the stream nearby. He washes his face and slicks his wet hair back. He tucks in his torn shirt and rolls up his sleeves. He creates style out of rags. He stands back. The sun climbs higher. A perfect beam of light hits the stone altar, making the wet flowers glisten like jewels. "Ready," James whispers. His heart is pounding. He turns to the tree. "Mrs. Diep," he calls out. "The groom is waiting." There is a rustle of leaves. Diep steps out. James has seen her in the dress before. But this is different. She has washed her face. She has woven small white flowers into her braid. The parachute dress flows around her pregnant body like a cloud. The sunlight hits her from behind, creating a halo around her silhouette. She walks barefoot across the moss, holding a bouquet of ferns. She doesn't walk like a fugitive. She walks like a queen. James straightens his back. His eyes fill with tears. "You look," James clears his throat. "You look like you own this entire forest." Diep stops in front of him. She sees the altar, the flowers, the clean-shaven groom. "You did all this?" she whispers. "I had some help," James points at the sun. "Great lighting crew." He takes her hands. The copper rings on their fingers clink together. "We don't have a priest," James says, "but we have the sky, and we have the earth. They have been watching us since the beginning." He takes a step back. Then slowly, James the billionaire who never bowed to anyone, sinks to both knees in the moss. He doesn't kneel to propose. He kneels to worship. He wraps his arms around Diep's waist, pressing his face against her baby bump. Diep gasps softly, her hands resting on his head. "James." "I vow to this child," James speaks to her belly, his voice thick with emotion. "I will build a world where you never have to run. I will build walls so high that no fear can touch you." He looks up at Diep. His face is streaked with tears, but his eyes are fierce. "And I vow to you, Diep," he says, "I lost my empire. I lost my towers. I lost my name. But looking at you right now, I realize I haven't lost anything. I was just clearing the construction site to build something better." Diep cries. Her tears fall onto his face. "Stand up, James," she sobs, pulling him up. "Stand up, my husband." James stands. They are face to face. "I don't have a vow written down," Diep says, trembling. "But I promise you this. If you are the roof, I will be the walls. If you are the sword, I will be the shield. Where you go, I go. James frames her face in his warm hands. The sun is our witness, James whispers. Kiss me, Diep demands softly. James leans in. He kisses her. It is not a hurried kiss. It is slow, deliberate, deep. It is a kiss that seals a contract more binding than any legal document. The wind sighs through the trees. A flock of white butterflies rises up around them like confetti. For a moment, the jungle is the Garden of Eden. They break the kiss, breathless. I love you, Mrs. Diep, James murmurs. I love you, Mr. James, Diep replies. Bzzzt. A sound cuts through the romance. Not a bird, not the wind. It is a mechanical hum, high-pitched, artificial. James stiffens. The groom vanishes instantly. The strategist returns. He looks up. Hovering above the tree line, a small black drone with a blinking red light is scanning the forest floor. A scout. They found us, James whispers, his voice low and urgent. Technology. They are tracking our heat signatures. Diep grips his arm. The fear returns, but she is different now. She is a wife. She has a ring. What do we do, she asks. Run? James looks at the drone. It hasn't spotted them yet under the thick canopy, but it's getting closer. He looks at the beautiful altar. Then he looks at the steep path leading down the other side. The ceremony is over, James says, grabbing his pack. Now comes the exit strategy. He grabs the waterproof bag. Pack the dress, quickly. We have 2 minutes before the pilot sends the coordinates. James, Diep grabs his hand. Are we running again? James looks at her. He looks at the copper ring on his finger. No, he says, a calm, intelligent glint in his eye. We are not running. We are disappearing. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, reflective, emergency blanket he saved from the crash. This blocks heat, he explains rapidly. If we cover ourselves, we become invisible to their sensors. He wraps the silver blanket around Diep's shoulders. This ridge is a maze, he says. Let's show them that an architect knows how to use space better than a machine. He takes her hand. Let's vanish. The jungle is silent, except for the high-pitched whine of the drone. Bzzzt. James and Diep are huddled under a silver emergency blanket. It is a thin sheet of Mylar James, salvaged from the crash. Stay still, James whispers. The Mylar reflects our body heat. To that machine, we are just a cold patch of ground. Diep nods, clutching his shirt. Through the thin material, she sees the drone hovering directly above the clearing. The drone rotates its camera. The red sensor light blinks, scanning the stone altar and the crushed moss where they had been kneeling. The machine is confused. The heat signatures were there a moment ago. Now, they are gone. James watches through a tiny gap. It's sweeping the perimeter, he whispers. We have to move, but slowly. Where? Diep breathes. James points, keeping his hand under the silver shield, towards a cluster of ferns leading into the valley. The waterfall, James says. Water absorbs infrared. It blocks thermal scans. If we get behind the water, we vanish. They begin to move. It is an agonizing process. They walk in unison, huddled like a single shapeless rock. Step, pause, step, pause. The drone spins around, focusing on a movement nearby. James freezes. He holds Diep tight. They stop breathing. The drone hovers lower. The wind from its propellers whips the leaves. It is close. James knows if he exposes an inch of skin, the sensor will lock on. He needs a distraction. James looks at the ground. Meters away, a large black volcanic rock sits in direct sunlight. It has been baking all morning. James smiles. Thermal mass. He slowly reaches down and finds a pebble. He waits for the drone to turn. He throws the pebble. Clack. The stone hits the hot volcanic rock. The drone snaps around, focusing on the noise. Its sensors scan the black rock. Because the rock is hot, it glows on the thermal camera. The machine hovers over it, analyzing the signature. "Now," James hisses. "Move!" While the machine is distracted, James and Diep scramble down the slope. They keep the silver blanket tight, looking like a strange silver beetle scurrying through the undergrowth. They slide down a muddy embankment. The roar of water grows louder. "Almost there," James grunts, helping Diep over a log. They burst through the vegetation and find themselves at the edge of a magnificent waterfall. The water crashes into a deep blue pool 50 feet below. The spray is cold. The noise is deafening, drowning out the drone. "Behind the curtain," James shouts. He leads her along a slippery ledge behind the falling water. The water hammers down inches from their faces. They duck into a shallow recess behind the falls. It is a small, damp cave, hidden by the liquid wall. James pulls the blanket off and folds it quickly. "Safe," he says, wiping water from his face. No thermal camera can see through this wall of cold water. Diep leans against the cool rock, sliding down to the floor. She laughs in relief. "My dress is wet," she giggles. Again. "It's a beach wedding now," James grins, sitting beside her. He is soaking wet, hair plastered to his forehead. He looks tired but triumphant. He didn't use force, he used physics. And he won. He looks out through the waterfall. Sunlight refracts through the droplets, creating a shimmering rainbow. "Look," James points. "Decorations for the reception." Diep looks at the rainbow. "It's beautiful," she whispers, resting her head on his shoulder. "Better than flowers." James wraps his arm around her. He looks at their copper rings. In the dim light, they don't shine like gold. They look steady, strong. "This is the honeymoon suite," James jokes. "Running water, air conditioning, privacy, 5 stars. Diep chuckles. "And room service?" James pulls out a crushed protein bar. He unwraps it like vintage wine. "Dinner is served," he says, breaking it in half. "Chocolate peanut butter, vintage 2026. Diep takes it. She eats slowly. Delicious. They sit in silence, eating their humble feast while the water roars, protecting them. The drone is miles away, chasing ghosts. James looks at his wife and her swollen belly. "We have a long walk tomorrow," James says seriously. "We need to cross the valley." "I know," Diep says. She turns to him, her face calm. "I'm not afraid anymore, James." "No?" "No," she touches his copper ring. "Because you are not just a CEO anymore. And I am not just a trophy wife." She looks him in the eye. "We are a team. You build the walls. I make it a home." James stares at her. A surge of love hits him. He kisses her forehead. "Team Diep and James," he whispers, "undefeated." He pulls her closer. The rhythm of his heartbeat mixes with the roar of the waterfall. Outside, the sun sets, turning the waterfall into liquid gold. Inside, 2 fugitives sleep in each other's arms, wearing rings of scrap metal, dreaming of a future they will build. The wedding is over. The marriage has just begun.
Mình lên trên đỉnh núi, Giang biến một sườn đồi hoang dã thành lễ đường tự nhiên, tự tay dựng bàn thờ, hái hoa rừng, chuẩn bị cho một đám cưới lặng lẽ. Duyệt khoác váy con dù trắng, bước ra như nữ hoàng giữa rừng sâu. Giang quỳ xuống trước bụng con, thề bảo vệ mẹ con cô suốt đời, rồi trao lời hứa làm chồng. Khoảnh khắc thiêng liêng bị cắt ngang khi một drone trinh sát xuất hiện. Giang lập tức chuyển sang chế độ chiến lược, dùng chăn phản nhiệt che thân và dẫn Diệp đánh lạc hướng thiết bị. Họ lẫn trốn sau thác nước, nơi dòng nước lạnh che giấu nhiệt. Trong hang đá sau thác, cả hai chia nhau thanh protein. Nhìn cầu vòng và nhận ra đám cưới đã kết thúc, nhưng cuộc hôn nhân của họ thực sự vừa mới bắt đầu.